The Palestinian resistance movement Hamas proposed to exchange all Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners at once in the second phase of the ceasefire agreement. Colombian President Gustavo Petro denounced that there are various groups of drug traffickers and smugglers who intend to make an attempt on his life. And the Brazilian prosecutor's office filed charges against former President Jair Bolsonaro for the attempted coup of 2022. Hello and welcome to From the South. My name is Belén de los Santos. I'm from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba, beginning with the news. And we now begin with the information. The Palestinian resistance movement Hamas proposed to exchange all Israeli hostages for the Palestinian prisoners at once during the second phase of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. The head of the Hamas movement in Gaza, Khalil al-Hayya, confirmed the initiative aimed at reaching a permanent truce and a total withdrawal of Israeli troops from the devastated Palestinian enclave. He announced that next Thursday, February 20th, the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages would be handed over, and also confirmed that next Saturday, 6 Israeli prisoners would be exchanged for 602 Palestinian detainees, 157 of whom are serving life imprisonment. Al-Hayya called for the terms of the agreement to be implemented without delay and expressed Hamas' readiness for the immediate implementation of the second phase. Now, in this context, we continue in Palestine as Israeli forces killed 2 Palestinians in Rafah in southern Gaza on Tuesday in another violation of the ceasefire agreement. Medical officials confirmed that 2 bodies were taken to a nearby hospital after the Israeli tank attack. In this sense, the Israeli army tried to justify the killings by claiming that it had opened fire on a number of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip who were approaching its forces. The attack highlights the Israeli regime's continued disregard for the ceasefire agreement reached with the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas. And the continuing siege of the occupied West Bank by Israeli troops and settlers has generated a humanitarian crisis that has resulted in massive displacements in the territory. Experts noted that Israel's tactics in the West Bank have become almost indistinguishable from those in the Gaza Strip, ransacking homes and expelling residents using ruthless intimidation. In recent weeks, Zionist forces advanced into towns such as Tulkarem, Farah and Nur Shams, separating families and awakening bitter memories of the war for the creation of Israel in 1948. According to figures published by several NGOs, Israel's military operations in the occupied West Bank have displaced at least 45,000 Palestinians, the largest number since the Middle East War of 1967. Now, in other news, Vietnam's parliament has approved a multi-billion-dollar rail project that will boost trade by linking the country's main northern port to the Chinese border. The $8 billion project won the support of 95% of lawmakers in the National Assembly. The railway will pass through some of Vietnam's manufacturing hubs, where global factories such as Samsung, Foxconn, and Pegatron operate and rely on component supplies from China. The voyage will travel 390 kilometers from the port of Haiphong to the mountainous city of Lao Cai in China's Yunnan province and into the capital city of Hanoi. It should be noted that a large part of this link will be financed by loans granted by the Asian giant. Meanwhile, in Japan on Wednesday, Ryukyu Kimura, the perpetrator of the 2023 attack on former Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The Wakayama court sentenced Kimura to 5 charges, including attempted murder and violation of the explosive control law. Defense lawyers argued that the defendant's intention was not to kill the former prime minister, but to injure him. However, the prosecution demanded 15 years in prison because an explosive test conducted a month earlier showed that the manufactured weapon had the capacity to kill. The attack on the former minister, from which he escaped unharmed, took place on April 15, 2023, at the port of Wakayama City, where Kishida's speech was scheduled to take place, and hundreds of people were waiting to hear from him. And the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, made his fifth visit to Japan to monitor the land contaminated by Fukushima disaster and to visit the Kashiwazaki Kariwa nuclear power plant. Grossi inspected a storage facility for contaminated soil from the 2011 disaster, while the Japanese government is debating how to dispose of it. The head of the IAEA will also visit the plant known as KK, with a capacity of more than 8,000 megawatts, which have been inoperative since the nuclear shutdown ordered by the Japanese authorities after the atomic disaster. Grossi's visit comes on the same day that Japan approved its new energy plan for the next 5 years. Now, in other news, more than 10,000 people were displaced by the armed conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and are seeking refuge in Burundi. The Burundian authorities reported that searches were being carried out in homes and hotels to ensure that Congolese were in possession of the necessary documents to stay in the country. They also expressed concern about the border between the two countries due to the displacement of people in the midst of the conflict in Goma and Bukavu, and warned of the possibility of the conflict in the DRC spilling over into their country. On the other hand, the authorities pointed to Rwanda as a factor of regional instability. Precisely in this context, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights reported that the M23 rebel group killed 3 children for carrying weapons and clothes abandoned by the army in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The organization also expressed its concern for journalists, human rights defenders, and members of civil society organizations who seek protection from retaliation by M23 rebels. On the other hand, maritime traffic returned to Lake Kivu after the reopening of the ports of the cities of Goma and Bukavu, which, according to the UN, could facilitate the entry of humanitarian aid into the country after weeks of fighting and looting. And now we have a short break coming up, but first, remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. We continue with more information. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, postponed his visit to Saudi Arabia to avoid legitimizing the U.S.-Russia meeting. The president declared that negotiations between the United States and Russia in Saudi Arabia were a surprise for his country. At a press conference with his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara, he said that he had postponed the trip to avoid coincidences. Zelensky informed that they have contacted the Saudi authorities to inform them of the change of plans and that they have agreed to hold the meeting on March 10th. Meanwhile, the President Donald Trump said that Ukraine needs elections if they want a place in the negotiations between Moscow and Washington. Trump's statements come after the Kiev regime expressed its dissatisfaction with the meeting in the capital of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, between high-level delegations from Russia and the United States who seek to normalize relations between the two countries and move towards an agreement on the conflict in Ukraine. In this regard, the U.S. president recalled that Kiev had almost 3 years to start negotiations on the settlement of the conflict and declared that Zelensky is a completely incompetent president who makes ridiculous statements and does not know the whereabouts of half of the money allocated to him by the United States. We go now to the United States as a fire broke out at a Pennsylvania aerospace factory in the state of Philadelphia, forcing schools to close and residents to stay indoors. According to the Abington police chief, the fire broke out at around 9:35 p.m. and in the morning it began to flare up with heavy smoke. Through a press release, the authorities of the municipality of Abington informed that the building was evacuated with no injured reported so far. They also noted that as smoke and particles from the fire spread throughout the area, residents and merchants around the factory were evacuated. And the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, denounced that there are various groups of drug traffickers and smugglers who intend to make an attempt on his life. The Colombian president made the statement during the ceremony of transfer of command of the new Director General of the National Police at the Francisco de Paula Santander Cadet School. The president also assured that they know the identity of those who would be behind the alleged attack and expressed his concern for their safety, for which reason he entrusted the new general with the task of dismantling the illegal networks and confronting them. This is not the first time that the Colombian president denounces an attempt on his life. Panamanian students staged a new protest on the Transandean Highway in front of the University of Panama, denouncing the violation of university autonomy by the National Police. The meeting defended university autonomy, the right to protest, and the defense of solidarity pensions. The mobilization took place after the police repressed a protest of students of the university, beating them, throwing gas at them, and throwing firebombs inside the university. After what happened, 2 students were apprehended by police agents, cases were opened against them, and they have precautionary measures of periodic notification as well as a prohibition to leave the country. The 48th meeting of the Conference of Head of State Government of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, opens on Wednesday in Barbados. The Caribbean heads of state will meet for 3 days to discuss various issues such as food and nutritional security, climate change, and the current challenges in Haiti, among other topics of interest. The meeting will be led by the bloc's president and Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, and CARICOM Secretary General Carla Bernet. The meeting was convened under the theme Strength in Unity, Forging Caribbean Resilience, Inclusive Growth, and Sustainable Development. And the Dominican Republic announced that it will extend the wall it is building on the border with Haiti by 10 to 12 kilometers. The decision responds to a request from ranchers in the border area of Dajabon in the north of the country, this according to Dominican President Luis Abinader. The country began building the barrier in 2021, claiming protection from irregular immigration, violence, and smuggling from Haiti. The construction of the wall, which will extend over half of the 340-kilometer border shared by the two countries, has already advanced to 80% in a first phase. It is important to note that since October, the Dominican government has implemented a large-scale deportation plan for Haitians in irregular migratory situations. Now we have a second short break coming up, but before we invite you to visit our YouTube channel at teleSUR English, there you will be able to rewatch our interviews, top stories, special broadcastings, and more. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back from the South. We continue with more information The Brazilian prosecutor's office filed charges on Tuesday against former President Jair Bolsonaro for attempting a coup to stay in office after his 2022 election defeat. Bolsonaro had been indicted in November of 2024 through a report filed by the federal police, which accused him of having full knowledge of the alleged coup plan to prevent President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva from taking office after his electoral victory. Furthermore, it stressed that the former head of state had planned, acted in, and directly and effectively led the plan. In this context, the charges filed on Tuesday, which include attempting a coup d'état, the violent removal of the rule of law, and forming a criminal organization, will now be analyzed by the country's federal Supreme Court. If accepted, Bolsonaro and 33 others could face criminal proceedings. In this regard, the Public Prosecutor's Office pointed out that 34 defendants are accused of attempted violent abolition of the democratic rule of law, organization for armed crime, and coup d'état, among other crimes. The prosecution's complaint is based on an extensive police investigation that establishes the existence of a plot that sought to keep Bolsonaro in power and prevent Lula's inauguration, which finally took place on January 1st, 2023. It should be noted that the police also filed charges against him for the misappropriation of valuable jewelry that should have been incorporated into the state's assets and for fraud in the vaccination certificates during the COVID-19 pandemic. We go now to Paraguay as the Chamber of Deputies accepted on Tuesday the resignation of parliamentarian Orlando Arevalo, who is currently being investigated for punishable acts related to corruption and criminal association. After an extraordinary session debate that started at 10 in the morning, the Paraguayan lower house unanimously accepted Arevalo's petition. Precisely, the former deputy had presented his resignation on February 8th after private conversations between him and the late legislator Eulalio Gomez, who allegedly contacted him when he acted as representative of the legislative body before the judge's prosecution jury. And we now move on to other topics. In Australia, dozens of dolphins have died after a pod of more than 150 of them stranded on a remote beach on the southern island of Tasmania. The dolphins were stranded on a beach near Arthur River Inlet on Tasmania's west coast, a sparsely populated area known for its windswept coastline. The pod of 157 dolphins belonging to a little-known deep-sea species is believed to have been stranded in the last 48 hours and that approximately 90 were still alive on Wednesday morning. In this regard, State Wildlife Officer Brenton Clark said it would be difficult to refloat the surviving dolphins, which can weigh more than a ton. The dolphins appear to be members of a large species known as false killer whales, so named because of the orca-like shape of their skulls.
Our mass stranding events usually involve pilot whales. However, these are false killer whales, and it is our first large mass stranding of these animals in around 50 years. It's currently an early stage in the response, and so assessments are ongoing. Therefore, some details are limited and yet to be confirmed. At this stage, we do not know why these animals have stranded, and we won't be speculating. The team on the ground will be conducting post-mortem investigations and sampling of deceased animals in an attempt to determine some reasoning behind the stranding.
And in Russia, Moscow Kremlin Museum signed a cooperation agreement with TV Bricks. This agreement marks the beginning of a new stage for the Kremlin, which started in 2025 with an exhibition of Russian art in Beijing and also simultaneous exhibitions in the center of Moscow. Collaboration will focus on strengthening international ties in humanitarian and informational areas, highlighting Russia's cultural and artistic richness. The agreement between these two institutions represents a significant step towards the expansion of the Kremlin's international presence. And the Carnival of Venice 2025 kicked off with colorful comparsas and big parades in this Italian city. For 10 days, thousands of tourists and locals participate in the event with costumes and tours through the streets with Venetian masks, a symbol of this carnival which allows attendees to immerse themselves in the mystery of the festival along with the Baroque-style costumes. The event is one of the country's major tourist attractions, welcoming every year thousands of people from all over the world who enjoy music, lights, and street shows. This year's edition commemorates the 300th anniversary of the birth of the adventurer Giacomo Casanova, with thematic activities inspired by his legacy. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and also on TikTok. For TeleSUR English, my name is Belén de los Santos. Thank you for watching.